Hello and welcome to another episode of ForgeTalks, a show where I do my very best smiling and nodding whilst people much smarter than me unpack the hot topics of the digital identity world. A few weeks ago, I promised we would have an episode of ForgeTalks dedicated entirely to autonomous ID, and I'm a man of my word, so I have joining me again Peter Barker, our Chief Product Officer. Welcome, Peter, back to ForgeTalks.
Hey, Fraser, it's good to talk to you again. Nice to be here.
So, Peter, autonomous ID, we had a pretty big announcement around it very recently. For anyone who missed it, do you want to just recap that announcement and just tell us what is autonomous identity?
Yeah, we were really excited to announce the worldwide general availability of ForgeRock Autonomous Identity. Autonomous Identity is an identity analytics solution powered by AI that provides continuous and real-time visibility, control, and remediation. It does this by collecting and analyzing data using machine learning, things like your user behavior activity, your accounts, your entitlements, your assignments, and it's able to identify security and risk blind spots in your programs. It provides much wider and deeper visibility into your programs as well to help you really understand what is the best access for your enterprise and how to deploy that into the enterprise. And finally, it adds value to your existing identity governance programs and systems by layering on top of that and basically providing a very smart brain that helps you get the maximum value from your investments.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. I have to admit, a lifetime of science fiction movies, has led me to the point where it's not exactly what I thought artificial intelligence was going to come into play, but it sounds really exciting nonetheless. I wonder if you could paint a bit of a picture for us. What was the problem that we initially set out to solve with autonomous identity?
So enterprises use a variety of techniques in order to try to manage identities for their enterprise. They do things like define roles that try to describe how an organization works. They use things like access certifications and reviews to make sure that the access that has been given to the users is still appropriate. The problem with that whole structure is that it doesn't really keep current with how the enterprise actually works today. And if you really think about it, and especially as businesses have become much more agile, what used to be described by an org chart just no longer really describes how work gets done in an organization. And so in some ways, people don't really work for organizations anymore. They work for organisms. They're like living and breathing, and things are constantly changing, and people are, getting involved in things that maybe traditionally their role wouldn't describe as something they would do. And the challenge that presents for the enterprise around identity is, how do you keep the privileges that you're giving people, that you're granting to people, how do you keep those current and reflective of what the organization or the people are actually trying to do, and to ensure you're not introducing more risk than is necessary? There's a concept in identity and security called least privileged access, basically where you give just what is needed for people to do their jobs, and that limits exposure to the enterprise. But the challenge is, as you are trying to grant access to people to do their jobs, there's this drift that occurs. More access naturally gets given to people over time that needs to be brought back under control. And traditional mechanisms that exist to try to cope with that really aren't staying current with the current times. And that's why we introduced autonomous identity, to really address this problem and help enterprises truly get on top of it.
Okay, so I understand the problem, and I can see how that would cause issues within businesses. I'm curious as to how companies are currently solving this problem.
Yeah, a big way that enterprises try to solve this problem, or to at least manage it better, is they use a concept called roles and role-based access control. And roles are nothing more than a description of what a group of people do. So a role might be something like payroll manager, and so everyone who is a payroll manager would fit into that role, for example. And they use that construct to try to describe all of the functions within a company so that they can also describe what does appropriate access look like for each of those roles. The challenge with roles is, as we talked about a bit ago, it's just not keeping pace with how companies actually work today. And also when you think about companies at very large scale, hundreds of thousands of employees, it's impossible to describe every person in the organization in the form of roles. And so companies have had limited success using this approach, but it's one of the only mechanisms that they have available to them. But we believe there's a better way to deal with that problem with autonomous identity. There's another problem too that organizations face is in order to try to manage that drift we talked about earlier, what they undertake is regular reviews by managers of people and system owners will review all of the access that their employees have or all of the access that the users of the system have to try to determine if it's still appropriate. But again, the challenge or the shortcoming of that approach is, first of all, people are very busy, and so they don't necessarily pay as much attention to that review as they probably ought to. Two is people, particularly in large organizations, managers and system owners, they probably just don't know who certain people are because they just can't possibly know everyone. And so what would be required of them is to go actually investigate each one of those cases and try to determine, is it appropriate for this person to have access to my system or my employee to have access to that thing? And the challenge with that is, as I said, people are very busy and they're human. And so that leads often to a concept called rubber stamping, where that manager or that approver will just literally just approve, as in rubber stamping it. And that leads to a problem of risk for the enterprise, which is over provisioning. So now what's happened is the access that has remained may not be appropriate, and it leaves the enterprise exposed to more risk than is necessary. So those are a couple of classic problems that we see in this space.
Right. And it felt like you were teasing me with a solution there. So tell me how autonomous ID fixes these problems.
Yeah, so if you really think about the problem, it's almost impossible to design a manual approach to keeping control of all of this effectively at scale and on a global basis.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the power of AI and ML really comes in the equation. We can use the data itself that the enterprise already has to predict what does good access look for every privilege across the entire organization, with very high confidence. And in some cases, we'll look at things that we may not be able to predict. What does good access look like? Because there just may not be enough data. But either way, what you've done is, whether you've predicted high confidence access or you have predicted low confidence access, is you've presented yourself an opportunity. In the case of high confidence access, because of that confidence, that you could just automate that, and you could remove the need to even have reviews, to have employees asking for access, because with high confidence who should have access to these systems, and you can automatically provision it and you can automatically remove it when people change their jobs. And so with prediction, it's very powerful because you can enable yourself to do a high degree of automation and remove a large part of this problem. On the other end of the spectrum, you have your low confidence access. And what that really represents is an opportunity for an enterprise to clean that up, because if there's not enough data to determine why there should be access at all, maybe the access shouldn't exist in the first place. So it gives you an opportunity to go look at that critically and figure out what of those things can just be completely removed. And in both cases, whether you're cleaning up or you're automating, you're just taking a lot of work out of the system. And what you're left with in the middle really is the access that you really truly need to focus on, with manual reviews and human eyes looking at things, because that's really where the most risk remains for the enterprise to pay attention to. And that's what autonomous identity really helps enterprises do, is focus their energy on the areas that present the most risk to the enterprise, allow them to clean up the things that just don't make any sense, and automate a big chunk of all of this that doesn't make sense to do in the first place. So it's a really powerful solution.
Okay, so I'm understanding that autonomous ID is basically the best thing since sliced bread. If I'm in charge of identity for a company, should I be getting worried? Does autonomous identity require me to rip and replace my entire current solution?
No, it's a great question. And, we've thought a lot about that because it's completely unreasonable for us to come to a customer and say, hey, we've got a great new solution. And by the way, in order to take advantage of it, you need to rip out and replace something you've been investing in probably for 5 to 10 years and a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's just unreasonable to take that approach. And we don't ask that of our customers. The beauty of autonomous identity is it can layer on top of or sit beside your existing system of record, your existing identity governance solution. It can ingest the data from that system as well as other sources of data, and it can do powerful predictions based on having that data. And then the other thing it can do is integrate with that existing system of record and actually take action within it. For example, to trigger an event-based certification as an example, or to revoke access. You still rely on that system of record to be truly the system of record of all of those things that are happening within your identity program. But autonomous identity, if you just think about it, is like a really smart brain that sits on top of it that helps you get the most of that investment.
Okay, that's obviously great news and it's really exciting. Have we seen any examples in the real world yet?
Yeah, with customers, first of all, we've been building autonomous identity for a few years now, and we've been doing it in partnership with, first of all, really great customers who are passionate about solving this problem, and we've also been doing it with a very strategic partner who's Accenture. And over those few years, what we've been able to do is really fine-tune the algorithms that ensure that we get maximum results from this approach. And so as part of that, we've also seen some very powerful results for customers. For example, we have a very, very large Fortune 10 United States company who, using autonomous identity across 15 million entitlement assignments and 87,000 employees, was able to see over 70% of all of their access privileges could either be automated or cleaned up. And in the words of the Chief Information Security Officer there at that company, he feels that over half of all employee access requests and reviews and approvals would be eliminated because of autonomous identity's power to be able to predict what access people need and to be able to automate and provision that access on behalf of the employees without them having to lift a finger. So that's a really powerful one.
Wow.
We also, at another company, a large financial services company here in the United States also, we ran autonomous identity against their ERP application. And in this case, it was about 10,000 employees, and they had about 2,500 access privileges that were being reviewed. And they found that 91% of all access privileges to that ERP application could be completely automated. And so that just it's such a powerful reduction.
That's crazy.
In risk. And yeah, it's really amazing. And so that just leaves just 9% of those things that they now need to manage, which is, as I said earlier, just greatly focuses the energy of the organization towards where the real risk lies. And that will help enterprises just be better.
Wow. Yeah, man, I'm even just thinking how much more I could get done if 91% of my day was automated.
It would be cool.
Yeah, that's honestly all sounds really, really cool. And for anyone watching who wants to get more information, I'll try and pop some links up on the screen, but there are blogs, white papers, videos, landing pages on our website that you can find at ForgeRock.com. But Peter, I just want to say thanks again for taking us through that. It's really exciting development, and hopefully we can revisit this in the future and you'll have even more amazing examples to share with us. So thank you again for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Nice to be here and looking forward to keeping everyone updated on this.
Brilliant. And everyone, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.